When I reluctantly agreed to watch the Star Wars movies with my fiance, I never imagined that I would see such beautiful costumes. I was absolutely blown away and inspired by the outfits Natalie Portman wears as Padme Amidala. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down how they transition her using costume from child and queen to a powerful woman who's in love. My name is Ellie-Jean. I help women to discover their unique type of beauty, and I also explore costumes from your favorite TV shows, films, and celebrities. Also, can we talk about how awesome this costume is? Like I say, I was very inspired by Padme, and now I have one of these, and so now I just need a Star Wars themed party that I can wear it to, so people in my real life are like, wow, that's awesome. The costuming in the Star Wars prequels, which from now on I shall describe as Star Wars, are amazing. They are really well thought out, very intricate, very detailed. They have this constant interplay with the original Star Wars trilogy, whilst also bringing new perspectives on what the clothing in the Star Wars universe could look like. The original Star Wars pulls a lot from medieval fantasy clothing. This inspires things like Princess Leia's classic hairstyle, things like the hairnets that we see Natalie Portman wear. We see Natalie Portman, for instance, in chainmail-inspired headgear, as well as influences from samurais, such as the more Asian-inspired outfits, which we also see developed through Padme's outfits in The Phantom Menace. The Star Wars films came out of a sci-fi boom in the early 2000s. Doctor Who is a product of this. The new series comes out in the early 2000s. In the age of the World Wide Web and mobile phones and the internet becoming accessible by more and more people, there was this huge fascination by technology and the future. And this led to a cyber aesthetic, which was worn as part of the trend cycle during this era. At the same time, there was a kind of counterculture to this. There is a fantasy boom with things like The Lord of the Rings, being nostalgic about nature and the outside world. So you're seeing these two very popular forms of media emerge as a kind of direct response to the influence of technology in people's everyday lives. And both of these intersect within the Star Wars costumes. So we see the medieval elements, which are inspired by fantasy and fairy tales, as well as these more sci-fi elements with this futuristic lens. This video is sponsored by Foreo. So, I'm actually not Darth Vader, as you may have noticed, but just a girl who's trying to glow up in the run-up to her wedding. In the past few months, I've actually used various red light masks. So when Foreo offered to send me this one, which is the most high-tech red light mask that I've actually seen on the market, I was beyond excited. I actually used to be really suspicious of red light. I thought there is no way that LED light can make your skin better. I thought this is some codswallop if ever I heard it. But when I looked into the science, red light is actually extremely effective. The reason it works is it stimulates the mitochondria in your skin, meaning it replenishes your skin faster and more effectively. It's essentially like recharging the batteries in the cells in your skin. This mask has 8 different wavelengths. The red light helps with signs of aging, the blue helps reduce blemishes and oiliness, the green light can even skin tone and reduce dullness, the orange light refreshes for a healthy glow, the purple targets inflammation and fine lines, this blue helps to relieve and de-stress the skin, the yellow reduces redness and smooths the skin, and NIR, which is an extremely powerful wavelength, improves fine lines, spots, and signs of aging. One of the coolest features is it molds to your face. You can see how it's silicone, so it's really squidgy. It just moves to the shape of the contours of your own face, which obviously means it can be a lot more effective as it is closer to the skin and it can target areas more directly. I always start my evening routine by cleansing my face, having a shower, then coming downstairs and putting on my light mask. I will sit and journal with it on, read my book, watch my favorite TV show even. I find that it's really, really user-friendly. You don't have to just sit and wait for 15 minutes. There is a 35% discount in the link in my description, and you can add this onto other discounted products as well, so you can get up to 50% off using this code. Thank you so much to Foreo for sending me this mask and inspiring this whole Star Wars theme for this video. The costumes in The Phantom Menace are definitely impressive. They're a little less interesting to me because they don't play so much with Natalie's features. There's a lot of influence from Japanese kimonos, which is a kind of extension of the inspiration of samurais for the Jedis. That's a really interesting play on the inspiration that we see in the original films coming through female costuming as well. But I think what is interesting here is Natalie has Gamine essence, which I will come on to a bit more later, but the kind of strangeness and quirkiness and weirdness of Gamine really works for these costumes, which have a lot of high contrast, for instance, and it also works for creating the strangeness of someone in a sci-fi film where ethereal might not necessarily be the best fit because ethereal is best for someone who is like an elf in The Lord of the Rings, someone ageless and wise, whereas Gamine has the strangeness, which is very similar to ethereal, but in a more youthful, quirky, strange, weird way, and we often actually see Gamines in sci-fi films, such as the Netflix series Bodies, where they go back and forth in time. This series features Shira Haas, who also has Gamine essence as the protagonist of the futuristic world. The best fashion film out of the three, though, is without a doubt The Attack of the Clones. This is when Padme really becomes a love interest, and as such, her costumes become more romantic, more pretty. They become a little bit more European, and the medieval element is drawn upon a lot more. This thematically makes sense because the idea of the romance began in the medieval era with people like Marie de France writing lays, which is kind of like short romantic stories about knights and princesses and love affairs. So it makes sense to have this influence on medieval costume because these kind of stories are the foundation of kind of the fairy tale aesthetic. And when we think of those fairy tale costumes being medieval, the fact that a lot of these romance stories began in this era is one of the reasons that that is a thing. So there's something extremely romantic about medieval inspired outfits. So we see a lot more of them in this film. They're also more fairy tale like, which again, princess and prince stories, which this kind of is in a roundabout way, because at this point that love could go either way. There could be something good to come out of it, which isn't what happens, but at this point it is still a love story. And it also makes sense that we see a lot more of this medieval influence during this film because there is a bit of a medieval boom here. Films like Ella Enchanted coming out a couple years later. There is that Shakespeare girl in 10 Things I Hate About You in 1999, so there is a kind of interest in medieval fashion in this era. In Revenge of the Sith, Natalie Portman has maternity looks for the majority of the film, which are incredibly beautiful. There are a lot of ethereal elements, and I mean this in the literal sense rather than the Kibby Kitchener style system sense. Very kind of star-inspired, angelic, very long, floaty dresses. And that's a really interesting take on maternity fashion because often we see maternity fashion as very sweet. There's a kind of innocence to the mother and things like this. And there is that kind of innocence here, but I love how they've made it more ethereal than very like sweet and girly because obviously they are still in space and this feels more fantastical. It's like pulling from the elves in The Lord of the Rings. The styles are very, very similar. And so it keeps this otherworldliness to her costumes. So let's talk about Natalie Portman. Natalie is a narrow, short, straight with her body matrix, which means she has narrowness in her upper body. As opposed to width, she doesn't have broad or wide shoulders and upper back. She is short, she looks short, and she also has straight lines, which means she's sharp and straight in her frame. I just had to open the door like this. That was fun. I was like, don't ask. So, straight lines mean she doesn't have softness or roundness in her frame. She's more sharp and straight in her silhouette. She has more straight lines than curved ones. Some examples of when this is done really well is the white outfit in Attack of the Clones, where she's wearing a short crop top and low-rise leggings, basically. It's a battle outfit. There are so many things in this that I love. For instance, it has a tight neckline, which honors the narrowness in her frame. The entire outfit is fitted to her silhouette, which is very good for narrowness. The top doesn't start cropped, but it becomes it. That crop is amazing for her short vertical line. It breaks up the vertical and looks fantastic. The trousers have a slight low rise, which honors her straight lines without being too low to the point where it doesn't honor her shortness. It's a nice in the middle, which is really good if you're trying to balance shortness and straight lines. I also like the cuff on her arm. That's very Gamine-ish. When they go and visit Anakin's home, Padme is in this outfit, except hers has a little sparkly bit on her skirt, which mine doesn't have. Anyway, long story short, she's wearing a crop top in this outfit, which honors her short vertical line. And again, we have a similar situation where it is lowered at the front, which is good for her sharper frame. Although we often see her in more official roles, wearing more oversized things. For example, in one of the most beautiful dresses I've ever seen in film, the watercolor dress. This is very oversized, and you'd think, isn't that better for someone with width? And maybe, but that creates a strangeness because of the fact that it's not totally harmonious with her, which works for something like a sci-fi film. And also there are moments to honor that narrowness. For example, the neckline here is very narrow and tight. Her hair is also up tight and narrow, so there is some honoring here. It's not entirely oversized, and that's what makes it feel more elegant. There is also on the skirt a little bit of narrowness pulling her in near the bottom, and that again makes it feel more right for her. The straight lines of her maternity dresses honor her straight line. There is also some narrowness with these, On someone with roundness, this kind of silhouette can be really overwhelming because it would get pushed out by the curve in the chest and hips, and it wouldn't have this same feeling that it has on someone with straight lines. On another maternity dress, she has a split just under the bust, which is really common in medieval fashion and fantasy fashion as well. For example, in Once Upon a Time, which I've recently done a video on, which you can check out here, Mary Margaret has a similar split here. And this is really good for short lines because it essentially breaks up the long line of the dress, which you would expect to see in a fantasy film or a fantasy inspired film like Star Wars, to better honor that short line without literally having to be a short dress. Now, can we talk about Natalie Portman's outfits in the Star Wars series without talking about the black dress? This dress was specifically designed by George Lucas, as some of you in my comments pointed out when I made a TikTok on this. And it was designed to be very sensual, very sexy, to be more powerful than the other floaty, pretty looks we see throughout the film. So first of all, it's narrow and fitted to her body, which is great for her narrowness. It's fitted pretty much throughout, and that makes her look extremely powerful because it honors the narrowness in her frame. The tight neckline also honors her narrowness, of course. Although the corset gives her a very indented waist here, the fabric is stiff and structured, which honors her straight lines, and also, again, that waist is slightly lowered without being too low, for her short lines. So it's that kind of mid-waist again, which is really good for short straight lines. And this kind of structure that we see wouldn't work on a rounded body type. It would feel way too stiff. So I think people get way too caught up on that waist, like the hourglass silhouette, when actually that isn't what makes a rounded or straight frame, as you can see here. We see a similar dropped waist on the gold medieval outfit, which is one of my absolute favorite looks, and so we see that dropped waist honored there as well. What these outfits show is that the costume designers have a really good understanding of what looks good on Natalie Portman's body type, and they really use that to their advantage when they're creating those moments when Padme is having her moment and she's supposed to look impactful. Natalie Portman has classic gamine and romantic essences. Her gamine is definitely her most obvious feature. She has petite features, a petite face. She has some sharpness to her chin and jawline. She has some sharpness to her nose, which is slightly straight. And she has quite sharp, taut cheekbones. She also has romantic essence, which I think is her most obvious second essence. There is something very sensual and womanly about Natalie Portman. She has some lushness to her lips. She has large eyes. She has slightly round cheeks. And she also has depth to her features. Your colouring can make an influence on your essences. In dark winters and dark autumns, this can definitely, I would say, enhance if you have romantic essence and make it even stronger. But being a dark autumn or dark winter in itself doesn't mean you have romantic essence, but it can certainly enhance that in your features if it's already there. And lastly, she has classic. Her features are overall well proportioned. They are slightly small, slightly sharp, slightly sensual, rather than being overwhelmingly any of these things. There's proportion and balance to her looks. We see, for example, in her wedding outfit, a lot of her romantic essence is played upon through the use of the intricate, very overwhelming lace. She has a lowered neckline, which has this touch of sensuality. The headpiece is quite gamine. It's quite strange and quirky and bizarre for a veil. Like, it's quite tight to the head. There's something quite playful about it, so that complements her gamine as well. We also see her romantic essence played with through use of curls in her hair, through both the Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Sometimes I think the curls lean too tight for her romantic essence, but I think one of the reasons for this is they are supposed to feel almost sweet and innocent. Curls are often used in literature and film to convey vulnerability and youth because curls are kind of associated with children. Lots of children are born with like ringlets, and they have ringlets throughout their childhood before it gets heavier and those ringlets kind of go away. So I think if we're supposed to see Padme as quite vulnerable, and that's been emphasized through her hair, but I wouldn't say that it's necessarily her best hair, and it feels ever so slightly forced at times, but that's a minor thing. Her silk maternity dress, I mentioned earlier that there's something very ethereal about it, but I would also say that it works for Padme because silk is a romantic fabric. It has sheen to it, that's very common in romantics. The details near the face on this gown, also with the buckle and the sharp, straight lines of the straps of the dress, are quite gaminish. There is that contrast, that sharp detail near her face. And also otherwise, this gown is very minimal and plain. That's quite classic. She wears a similar nightgown in Attack of the Clones. When she's staying with Anakin, the robe is a velvet texture, which is very romantic. And of course here, she's supposed to look especially romantic. This is when they're very much in love and connecting in that way. So she's supposed to look very sensual here. And so obviously the silk of this nightgown is very romantic also. But there is some contrast between the darkness of the robe and the lightness of like the nightgown, which creates some contrast. I am going to come back to the leather look, which is very famous and iconic. So it's worth talking about. The metal headband is quite Gaminish. There's something very quirky about it. It feels very right on her head. Less so on mine, as I have a very high forehead, but you know what, it's fun. So the metal headband is quite Gaminish. It's, again, very sharp, hard, but petite. The tight neckline and the contrast between the neckline and her skin, all those sharp, straight lines in small squares, is very Gaminish. Leather can be romantic. People often think of it as a dramatic or natural thing, but leather can actually be romantic. There is something sexy to leather, which is quite a romantic thing, especially when paired with gamine as well, because leather and that kind of stiffness can feel quite sexy on a gamine. The detail in the skirt is quite sharp, which is very gaminish. There's something lacy to it, which is romantic, but it's sharp. And also the detail near her face is quite simplistic. All that detail is in the skirt, and that's because of her classic essence is kind of emphasized nearer her face. And also in her gold medieval look. Obviously this is very romantic. There is some sheer fabric on the arms. The florals are extremely romantic. The headpiece again is quite gamine, although there are romantic elements such as the roundness here is quite romantic because it has that round shape. And the soft tulle, again, is extremely romantic. It's light, it's floaty. So lastly, let's talk about her color season. She is a dark autumn. She is dark, slightly warm, and between medium and high contrast. Some moments when we see this emphasized is her wedding look again. Rather than being in a clean, bright white, such as this, she's in more of an ivory, which is very warm, and that feels much more complementary against her skin. Her medieval look is another favorite of mine in regards to her season. It's this deep gold, which is beautiful on her. And she also wears this outfit, which is like a deep royal purple. All of the outfits in the Phantom Menace, also the very bright reds, for instance, and she wears a deep burgundy outfit at one point. That's extremely complimentary for her dark autumn season. I hope you found this video interesting. Thank you so much to Foreo for sponsoring this video. If you would like more TV and film analysis, you should absolutely check out this playlist here. If you also want to know your essences, body type, color season, you should check out my features analysis handbook. The link is in the description. I will see you next time.